What is the Atma's nature? What is it? Now, this is now where we start to see perhaps a little bit of bleeding over into another topic, and that topic is Brahman, God, which would be the next one in our series. Now, the Jiva's Swarupa, the term Swarupa means its inherent nature. The nature of the soul itself is the same as God's. Let me repeat that statement. The nature of our soul is the same as God's nature. And that nature is comprised of 5 components. First is jnanam, or sometimes referred to as chit. It has inherent knowledge. It is conscious. It possesses consciousness. It is one of the soul's attributes. Then we have satya or sat, which means truth or existence. It is real. It is self-evident. Third is ananda, which means bliss. That its nature is bliss. Its experience is bliss, absolute bliss. Fourth is amaltva, or sometimes amala is referred to, which means purity, or better yet, uncorruptible purity. This incorruptible purity says that essentially it can never fall from its state of purity. Very important. Please note that. The soul, the Atma, can never fall from its state of purity. So when we talk about a wounded soul, when we talk about a dark soul, we're not really using correct terminology and language. The soul is ever pure. It is ever spotless. The things that the soul is entangled with, the material nature, mind, etc., all of that, yes, that we can say goes through different impurities, defects, etc., etc. Fine. But the soul is incorruptibly pure, amala or amaltva. And the fifth is ananta, which means it is eternal, beginningless and endless. That is what is meant by this, okay? Without a beginning and without an end, it does not ever die, neither was it ever born, okay? That substance of which it is made of, that substance of which it is comprised of, was never created. Why? Because as we heard from Krishna in chapter 15, verse 7, the soul is a portion of Krishna himself. Krishna also declares in the Gita that he was never born. He is the original, the eternal. Therefore, so are the Jivas, the souls. So to recap this point I've just made, the quality of the soul, the inherent nature of the soul, we call this the Swarupa of the soul, is the exact same as God's inherent nature, his quality. And when we then do God in a future class, you will see that that is exactly the same thing I'm going to present to you. God has knowledge, consciousness. God is Sat. He is self-evident, self-existing. He is true. He is Ananda. His experience is absolute bliss. He is Amala, Amaltva, meaning incorruptibly pure. And he is Ananta, meaning eternal. So similarly, the soul has the exact same nature as God. Now, this would suggest that the soul is once more equal to God, same as God. No. The Sri Vaishnava understanding is that the soul is, whilst in quality the same as God, in quantity it is not the same as God. It is different from God. The soul is an atomic spiritual entity, and the term is amsha, portion. As we heard from Krishna in chapter 15, verse 7, the Sanskrit that Krishna used was amsho, meaning a particle or a portion of it, okay? What does this mean practically? Well, it means that the soul, whilst being in nature equal to God, is less than, in a sense, in potency. And because it is less than, or a portion, and God remains something greater, the next very, very important thing that we're going to be looking at and studying today is what is its relationship to God then? If we have concluded that the soul and God are not the same, then what is the soul to God? What is the relationship between these two things? Okay? Now, in the last class on Hinduism, I mentioned one of the philosophies called Vedanta. It is essentially a discussion on 3 things. What is the relationship between God, Brahman, the soul, Atma or Jiva, and material nature, Prakriti? How do they relate to one another? What I'm about to explore with you is how the soul relates to God. We have already identified so far one thing. They're not the same. Okay? So the next thing we have to identify is, if they're not the same, then what are they towards one another? The first step of that explanation or journey is identifying the different types of souls, the different types of jivas. There are 3 different types of jivas in the slide I've presented to you, okay? The first is called Nitya Suri. The word Nitya means eternal. So the Nitya Suris are the eternally free servants, or the eternally free souls, meaning that those souls have never been suppressed or possessing of avidya, ignorance. Neither have they ever been samsaris, which means part of this samsara, this ocean of birth and rebirth and birth and rebirth, incarnations, etc. They have never been bound, neither by karma or anything else. Examples of this are Garuda, Anantashesha, the snake bed that Narayana lies on. Garuda, the vehicle upon which Narayana journeys forth. Okay? So these are one category of souls. They are not God, meaning that they are still amshas, they are portions only of this nature, but they are those portions that have remained from eternal time ever free. Never have they been submitted or submerged into this avidya. Okay? The second category of souls is called mukta jivas. So jivas that are mukta. Mukta means liberated. So a jiva that was previously bound, previously in bondage, that has through its surrender or its realization, etc., through the grace and saving of the Lord, Guru, that jiva has attained liberation, and now it is called a mukta jiva. Now, what happens to that jiva in an ideal circumstance in Shiva Vaishnava theology or an ideology? Essentially, that jiva goes to Vaikuntha. Vaikuntha is the spiritual abode of the Supreme, of the Lord, Narayana, and engages in its serving relationship with Narayana there in absolute purity without any hindrance to its service. Hindrances that we would otherwise experience when materially incarnated because of the limitations of matter. Okay? In the spiritual world, those limitations of matter would be lifted, and therefore our service can happen at a higher level or of a higher quality, if we can perhaps call it in that way. That is the objective of all jivas, to become mukta jivas. Since we cannot become nitya suris, we are already bound, as we can experience for ourselves. The third and final category of jivas that I'll be presenting today is called Bada Jiva. And a Bada Jiva means a jiva that is bound. It is bound by karma to this wheel of samsara, this process of birth and rebirth. Now, it goes through different realms, different bodies, different incarnations. Please remember that the material world is not just planet Earth. We'll go through this in another course, but essentially the Hindu conceptualization of material existence is that there is Earth, there are 7 lower planets, and there are 7 higher planets, so to speak. We can summarize them as the earthly plane, the heavenly plane, and the hellish plane. Okay? But do not confuse the heavenly planes with Vaikuntha, Lord Narayana's supreme abode. The heavenly planes and the hellish planes are still part of material nature called Prakriti, of the creation, so to speak. Whereas Vaikuntha is the spiritual abode that is not subjected to any of the defects or, let's say, features of material existence, okay? And that is the destination of the Mukta Jivas. The Mukta Jivas go to Vaikuntha, they do not go to some heavenly planet within the material sphere, okay? So that must be very clearly understood, okay? To summarize again this section, 3 different types of jivas: bound, called Bada Jiva; free, called Mukta Jiva; ever free, called Nitya Suri. We are, for the most part, unless we have some hidden Nitya Suris among us, we are Bada Jivas attempting to become Mukta Jivas. We have understood so far that our nature is non-different from God. However, it is quantitatively different. We are just the portion. And we have come into this world to use the material platform, the material plane, to conduct our journey towards this status of mukta jiva. One thing that has become very obvious then as a conclusion of this is that we must understand, consequently, what is my true relationship with Brahman, with the Supreme, so that I can become this mukta jiva and I can get rid of any false conceptions or incorrect, misleading conceptions about myself that may be holding me or attaching me to something that will not allow me to become the mukta jiva that we desire to be. So,